Red Bull? Just kidding, it's water. 007, thank you. Laurent? How you doing, brothers and sisters? Shabbat Shalom. Are we excited today? All right. Okay, so today I want to speak on a doctrinal subject, something that we haven't heard here in Toronto in quite some time. In fact, I've been a member attending here for going on, well, a little over 10 years now, and I don't recall ever hearing this subject here before, certainly on the Armor of God and other places. It's one of our fundamental doctrinal beliefs of the Church of God International. Any guesses what that might be? Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. It is the dietary laws. So I'm going to talk today on the biblical dietary laws. And I'm going to actually read straight from the CGI Statement of Beliefs, doctrine number 27, which it is, exactly what it says, just to set this up. Biblical dietary laws, including the prohibitions of Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, are among the many health laws God gave to Israel. Jesus, the apostles, and the early New Testament church observed them, and they remain in effect today. Scripture indicates that laws pertaining to clean and unclean animals were recognized and observed from the earliest times. So, what I want to specifically speak on today in regards to the dietary laws, because there's so many things we can talk about. It's a very big topic, and as I said, it's long overdue, I believe, to have a presentation on this topic. I want to focus for this presentation just on the physical aspects. So, number one, I will be sharing the science behind the dietary laws, so the relation to the animals that are listed in the Bible as far as clean and unclean, and the science behind those laws. I will share some results of a scientific study that was done. And then as I wrap things up, that's pretty much the meat of the presentation. As I wrap things up, I want to just kind of touch on something in regards to our overall physical health in general. And then, as oftentimes I like to do with my presentations, issue a challenge for us all. So once again, this message is just going to focus on the physical aspect, but surely I do have aspirations in the future to do messages on other aspects of the dietary laws, perhaps the fact that they're actually still relevant, and we actually should still keep them. So I want to begin, if you can turn your Bibles to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. This is the fifth and last chapter of the Torah. And we want to go to the very last verse. So the last chapter and the last verse of the Torah, Deuteronomy 5, verse 33. And I just want to read this just to pretty much set the premise for what we're going to discuss today. In Deuteronomy 5, 33, walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. So that's the fundamental principle I want to start with, the notion that all of God's laws, and of course today we're talking about the dietary laws, but all of God's laws were indeed made or given for our benefit. So let's discuss the dietary laws. What are they? So first of all, as most of us are well aware, they're found in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, and they're broken up into three categories. We have land animals, we have sea animals, and then we have the animals of the air. And God gives very specific instructions and outlines a whole list of animals that are deemed either clean or unclean. So based on most of these animals listed in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, and we won't necessarily turn there, at least not now for the sake of time, I actually just want to focus on the scientific evidence, the test that was done on these animals. A gentleman by the name of David Israel Mocked, he was an Orthodox Jew and a doctor of Hebrew literature. He pretty much spearheaded a study back in, I believe it was 1953, testing the toxicity of animals described as both clean and unclean in the Bible. Now, just a quick show of hands. Is anybody familiar with this specific study? I'm sure some of you are. Okay, I see a few hands up. Very nice. Excellent. So, of course, toxicity is the degree of which a substance can harm humans or animals. So that's what this test actually focused on. So what we want to do is look at the toxicity rate. Actually, I'm going to take a minute to I'll actually read this in detail just to set this up so you can understand all of the numbers and the different figures that I'm going to share. It says here, using the seedlings of a legume called the white lupin, Mott noticed that by introducing various substances or extracts of tissue to the plants, an interesting effect occurred. By following the root growth of the lupins, he determined that the amount of toxins in the sample with what he called the toxicity rate. So that's what we're looking at, the toxicity rate. The lower the rate growth, the more toxicity the sample, the more toxic the sample. A culture of lupin seedlings was placed with an extract of the muscle tissue of an animal. If the growth rate was slowed to below 75% of normal, the sample was classified as toxic. So we're going to keep in mind that the higher the percentage, is the less toxic it is to the human body, and the lower the percentage, the higher the percentage, the less toxic to the human body, the lower the percentage, the slower the growth rate of the culture, and therefore it's higher in toxicity. So that's the formula. 76% and up, it's good for the human body. 75% or less, then it's destructive or deemed as poisonous, highly toxic for the human body. And not all of the animals in Leviticus and Deuteronomy were tested, but certainly a good portion of them were. So let's take a look at the numbers. Okay, hope we can all see that. So first, these are the beasts. Now you can look at the percentages and clearly you can see a major difference between the clean and the unclean. Okay, that should be good. Good. The oxtail and the lamb chops are looking pretty nice now. All right. Over here as we see, the clean, once again, over 76%, so those are deemed clean, so very low in toxicity. And over here, the unclean, we'll look at, for example, the horse, very low, so that means very high level of toxicity, 39%. You have the rabbit, 49%, so on and so forth. So these are the mammals. Next, I want to take a look at the birds, and then we're going to kind of tie everything together. Can we show the title? Oh yeah, sure, why not? So most unclean birds are actually categorized as scavengers because they actually eat dead birds and roadkill. One important note that I will share, and I'm sure some of you are aware of this, in the King James Version, actually in specifically Leviticus 11:18 and Deuteronomy 4 verse 16, it actually lists swan among unclean birds. But it's become common to know that that's actually a mistranslation. Most modern versions of the Bible, they actually have it as an owl. It's some type of an owl. So in fact, swan, although it is in the King James Version, once again, that's a mistranslation. Swan is actually deemed to be clean. Anybody eat swan? Anybody like swan? No, no swan. All right. So just take a quick look at the numbers and kind of sink that in, some of the birds there. And lastly, let's look at the sea creatures. And we'll notice that the percentages of clean fish are much, much higher than other animals that are deemed to be clean. So fish, for the most part, at least the clean ones, are very, very low in toxicity, some of them with pretty much zero toxicity. You see some of my personal favorites on the list, halibut and cod and salmon. But I must note, just because the percentage is high, like let's say black drum, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthier than any other animal. Certainly it means that there's less toxicity, but of course toxicity is just one of many factors to consider if you want to actually consider something healthy or good for human consumption. I noticed something when kind of compiling, putting this together and looking at this study. For some reason, there wasn't a listing, or I don't know if he did any tests on popular sea animals like lobsters and crabs and things of that nature. It would have been interesting to see the numbers there. I know those are things that are very popular to eat. Shrimp, of course, yes, shrimp, very popular. An interesting fact is that eel, which is listed at 40%, it was said during the 2004 tsunami that eel was actually found eating the flesh of dead humans, so dead human flesh during the 2004 tsunami. So lo and behold, the scavengers of the sea. So some very interesting findings. What I want to do is pretty much just sum up the findings in terms of how or what Dr. Macht actually concluded based on this study. So I'll just share this with you here. The muscle extracts of fish with scales and fins were practically non-toxic. The muscle extracts of fish without scales and fins were highly toxic. Over 90% of the seedlings from juices of clean animals grew. Less than 50% of the seedlings, from unclean animals grew. And finally concluded that unclean animals were 100% more toxic. Almost zero toxicity was found in clean animals. So I think if we were to kind of, look at this, and I'm a man, I'm a very practical man. I do enjoy science. I do enjoy, looking at hard facts. I think we can come or draw the conclusion that the animals that God lists as unclean in the Bible, one of the reasons, obviously there's a spiritual component as well, but from a physical standpoint, one of the reasons that God pretty much said, eat this or don't eat this, was for our physical benefit, for our physical health, and I'm sure we would all agree with that. I do want to take a minute to actually single out one of the most consumed meats in the world. You see it almost everywhere. Certainly there are lots of millions and millions of dollars in advertising dollars spent promoting the consumption of this particular meat, and that is swine's flesh, the pig. Isn't that a beautiful picture right there? Isn't there a nursery rhyme, the 5 little pigs or something? This little pig went to the market, this little pig went somewhere. What was it, 3 pigs? Okay, so pigs, swine's flesh. As it states there, according to the CDC, more than 100 viruses come to the US each year from China through, through pigs. Very staggering, very, very staggering. Just a few other things I want to share, and hope we don't gross anybody out here, but this is important things that some of us are very well aware of, and although most of us, I'm sure, abstain from these foods, which we all should, these are definitely important things to have in terms of our knowledge and passing it on to others and so on and so forth. Pigs are filthy animals. Filthy, filthy animals. When it comes to eating, I mean, at times, me and most of you know I'm a vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian for 15 years. I eat fish. I do eat fish. But I consider myself picky at times in terms of, my choices, my food selection. Pigs, on the other hand, no discrimination. They do not discriminate. They will literally eat anything, including dead carcasses, their own young. I mean, they just don't discriminate. A pig will literally eat anything. A couple of interesting things here. Pigs have a very fast digestive system. It usually takes a pig about 4 hours to digest its food compared to a cow, which is about 24 hours. Now, many of us will know that during the digestive process, that's when our body actually is getting rid of, emitting the toxins from the food or whatever it is that we're eating. So because the pig actually digests food so fast, it doesn't give it the opportunity to properly get rid of those toxins, and they actually stay in the swine's flesh, which can be very, very dangerous to one's health. Another fact about pigs is that they have no sweat glands. Unlike most mammals or most animals, pigs have no sweat glands. Sweat glands are a tool that the body uses, once again, to get rid of toxins. So the more toxins, so this actually leaves a lot more toxins in the pig's body. And then, of course, there's trichinosis, which is an infection that humans get from eating undercooked or uncooked pork from the trichinella worm. So that's, and there's a lot of symptoms and a lot of things that go with that. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. So the question is, based on this, and not just the swine, but obviously the other foods that we mentioned and all the foods that were deemed as unclean that God forbid man from eating, why so? Why did God forbid the eating of certain foods? And I probably did answer that a little bit, but let's expand a little further. The fact is that not all animals were meant for human consumption. Some of them were designed to clean up the filth of the world. Yes, we tag that as living vacuum cleaners. There's a reason why, I'll use lobster for example, there's a reason why they swim at the bottom of the sea. They're there to clean the stuff. That's right, they're cleaners, the vacuum cleaners of the earth. But whatever the specific reason is in terms of why certain animals were created for whatever reason, I think it's important for us to all acknowledge that Yahweh draws a very clear line, a very clear distinction between darkness and light, between night and day, between wrong and right, and certainly between clean and unclean. Now, in closing, one of the reasons why I really wanted to speak on this subject and kind of bring it to light, and I will definitely, as I said, do a follow-up and perhaps touch on, some of the spiritual implications of, the reason for the dietary laws, is I want to encourage all of us through the course of, we have entered a new calendar year, 2015. I personally feel, and I can speak for myself, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, life, it's all about balance. And one of the things that perhaps we neglect as individuals and even corporately as a group, yes, we do focus a lot of our attention on, growing spiritually growing. But how much focus do we actually put on our physical well-being, our physical health, matters of physical health? And certainly the food that we eat isn't everything, but that's certainly a very big part of it in terms of our habits and things of that nature. So the challenge is quite simple. I challenge myself, and I challenge each and every one of you to identify, moving forward into this calendar year, at least one thing, first of all, just to identify one thing that you can improve on in terms of matters of your physical health and nutrition. It could be to lose weight. It could be I need to eat more greens. I need to eat less salty food, sodium, things of that nature. I need to cook more food and eat out less, things of that nature. In my last message right after the feast, I know the challenge was from a spiritual standpoint. We talked about growing spiritually from the end of the feast to the coming Passover in 2015. So in the same vein, this challenge, and once again, this is for all of us, and whoever wants to take it up, so be it, is for us to once again identify one area that we can improve on physically in terms of our physical health, which is sometimes perhaps something that we neglect. And I'll say that to be honest with you, me myself, I do consider, not just because I'm a vegetarian, but I do consider myself somewhat of a nutritionalist in terms of I'm very picky and choosy between the foods that I eat and the things that I do. For the most part, I eat healthy, I would say 6 days a week. But if I'm to be very honest with you, the one day that I let things slip and I perhaps would eat things that I normally wouldn't eat is the Sabbath, this Sabbath day. And I'm not picking at anybody, because even me myself, I'll put myself out there and say I could definitely do a better job of contributing more healthy items to the table downstairs where we meet in the gym. But for the most part, if we were to look at the different options and food choices, and we were to balance it out in terms of health and nutrition, let's be honest with each other, we have a little bit of work to do. So perhaps that's another challenge that we can all look to improve on. And just one thing, for example, off the top of my head, I love those little croissants, whoever brings the croissants or the rolls. But I mean, maybe we would look into whole wheat instead of white flour, things of that nature. These are just things that we can perhaps consider and look into in terms of just overall health and nutrition and how we can improve and be a little better. Please turn with me, brothers and sisters, to the third epistle of John. The third epistle of John. I want to close with this. And do note that there are some handouts at the back table. It's a 3-page list that I received from our pastor, Bill Watson, in terms of, it's just a full list of all clean and unclean foods. So please feel free to grab a copy if you so desire. They're at the back table. A list of all the clean and unclean animals. Third epistle of John. So there's one chapter there. Let's go to verse 2. And this is what I want to leave you in consideration. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth.